Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This year for my son's birthday, I asked him what cake he wanted. I thought he was going to say another Hay Bear inspired cake, as that seems to have been the pattern for the last 3 years, but much to my surprise, he asked for a Michael Jackson birthday cake. Everyone looked at me and said, "How are you going to make that?" And I just responded, "I have no idea." So you're all probably very familiar with Michael Jackson's famous song Thriller. I thought he would be wanting a Thriller cake. That's pretty cool. Zombies and weird things coming out in the middle of the night when you're sleeping. But no, he didn't want Thriller. He wanted Smooth Criminal. The gravity-defying pose of Michael Jackson that made that video so famous, and I had to create that in a cake topper. Normally my cakes are on a lean, if you remember the avocado cake last year, but this time I had to purposefully make it lean and make it stay that way, and that was really challenging. I attempted to make the cake topper for this cake 3 times before I got it correct the 4th time, and the only way that I could think to make this cake topper stand up, defy gravity, and mimic Michael Jackson's famous move from the Smooth Criminal video was to use wire. So let me talk you through this process. At the start of this video, you probably saw a drawing or an attempted drawing of Michael Jackson on a lean with all these measurements next to it. My theory is if I can draw it, then I can probably make it out of cake. So my first attempt was to draw this image, and then I thought, in order to make this cake topper stand, fondant on fondant is going to be way too heavy. It's probably going to pull it down and I'd need to prop it up. So I had to make it out of something that was lightweight. So to the cake store, and I got flour wire. This is obviously food grade, and I chose pink just because that's the color that they had at the time, and I thought, why not? So to make this wire stronger, I twisted it on itself. I probably should have just bought a thicker wire to start off with, but I decided this one would be fine and wrapped it up, and it was much easier to manipulate by hand, even though I did have to get pliers and side cutters at some point. So once I made the frame, which was mimicking the drawing of the frame at the start of this picture or the start of this video, then I tried to make the frame match the size of that picture. To be honest, the model of once I made it was bigger than the drawing that I had, but it was pretty close, and you'll see that I left the wire longer in the legs, and this was on purpose, and also on the arms until I was ready to cut it down, because I wanted to try and make that wire stick into the cake. My original plan was to stick the wires into the cake and have it on a lean, but then I was concerned that the wire would cut through the cake and I didn't want to have to add things. So you'll see what I did a little bit later on and I'll explain it. But I continue to wrap up the wire frame with aluminium foil because, put it this way, there was no chance I was going to be getting anyone to be eating this Michael Jackson anyway with all this wire in it. So I thought, if I'm going to start this process with it not being 100% edible, I may as well keep going with it and see if I can get it to at least stand up. Okay, so after I finished wrapping up the wire frame with aluminium foil, I didn't wrap the entire structure. I added to where I wanted to add bulk, or where I wanted to fill it out, if that makes sense. So the arms need to be skinnier than the rest of the body, so I didn't want to put aluminium foil all the way down the arms because then the arms would be really chunky. The legs were going to be wearing a suit, and the main body was going to have a suit jacket on it, so I needed that to stand out a bit more. And then you'll see here I'm cutting the arms down because they're just too long and they're interfering with everything that I was doing. So when I stood up the frame, it started to move forward, which is what you would expect given the angle that I had this thing on. So I had to manufacture something that would prevent it from going forward. My thought process here was to just balance it out with whatever was on the back, put it on the front. The wire and a cake dowel were what I used to get it to try and balance itself out. And this was really effective, might I add, but the only thing going through my head at this stage was, okay, I've got it standing up now, but how am I going to cover all of this? I'm not going to wedge it between the cake because of the distance between the actual cake topper and the stand. So I thought, future problem, let's just see if I can actually make this thing. This was the 4th attempt after all. I'm using gum paste or sugar paste, modelling paste here to cover the aluminium person that I'm putting together, which looks a little bit like an alien at this point. And I bought white, coloured it the different colours I needed, which was nude for the skin tone and black for the accents, white for the suit, but that stayed white obviously, and blue for the shirt. I didn't want to go through too much effort with all of this in case it wasn't going to work out again, so I was just trying to be as simple as possible. So to make the modelling paste stick to the aluminium foil, I used water and just brushed it on. I rolled out the gum paste really thinly because what I'm doing here is just trying to cover all the aluminium foil bits first and then go back with the suit. So I didn't care if you could see all the lumps and bumps of the aluminium foil because I knew that this was going to be covered again by more gum paste that was not going to be fitted to the structure as such. And I knew that the suit that I was going to be putting on this body was going to stick to the other modelling paste that I'd already added. So I threaded on some arms, and because of the paste that I used, it's really good to like cut out fiddly bits. You can cut out like little fingers and things like that to just add a little bit of character, which is what I did. And I kept having to go back and add more because I didn't want to cut out large pieces and try and get it to fit the armature correctly. I wanted to just make it as simple as possible in that it was going to be covered again and it didn't need to be 100% perfect. At the start of this video, I had written down all these measurements thinking I was going to make this model that was exact to the millimetre. That never happens when I start making something. So this is probably one of the only times you'll see that ruler come out in this video, and that was, I don't even know why. I thought maybe I was being precise, but I just ended up doing all of this by eye. So the measurements might have been an initial guide of proportions, but once this thing started to come together, I just cut things to whatever size the armature was and then just made adjustments as I was going. The whole time I was making this cake topper, I hated it. This was attempt 4. The first attempt I tried to make just purely out of fondant, which is what I used to do in the past, but it was way too heavy on itself. The second attempt I tried a wire armature, which I'd made again, and the wire that I had was way too flimsy and just was not cooperating. Then I tried to make it just straight out of the gum paste, and then I decided, no, I'm gonna make it out of wire, wrap it in aluminium foil, and then stick the gum paste to it. When people were asking me, oh, how did you actually make this? And I said that, they were like, oh yeah, that's easy. Well, no, it still was not easy. And I was still copping flack from my son halfway through saying, you're not making this right. I don't think he knew how to make it. And I don't think there was a rule on how to make this thing, but it came together all right in the end. I personally wasn't happy with it still when it finished because I can pick all the flaws, as I'm sure a lot of professional bakers and cake makers can. But as I've said in the past, this is not what I do for a day job. This is what I do for my kids and my family when it's their birthdays, and that's it. No training, no business, just a little bit of fun to bring their cakes to life. Time to start dressing it now. So these are the suit pants, and the way I did this were rectangles, and then I cut a slit up the top and run that slit on the inside of the leg and wrapped it around to the outside, then tried to smooth out the pant leg on the side where the seam is. That was the easiest way for me to put the pants on, rather than cut a front pair and a back pair and then try and make them meet in the middle and meet on the sides. That would have been annoying. And the same method is what I did for the sleeves and the jacket itself. Obviously I had to hem the pants when they were on because they were a little bit long, and I told you the ruler was only there to cut it straight. It wasn't there for any measurements. I didn't use measurements when I was doing this. I did it by eye, so I had to keep making those adjustments along the way. If you are planning on making one of these cakes, which, you know, you might want to, start it in advance. I started this 7 days before the birthday party to see if I could actually do it. And I think the first 2 days were throw the cake topper in the bin days. And then by day 3, things started to come together. So I made it like, okay, here's the wire frame. Then the next time I put the aluminium foil on it. Then the next time I started to dress it. And then the next day I did the cake, and then I had to put it all together on the day of the birthday. So after I made this cake topper, I treated it with the most utmost care. I did not leave it anywhere where it could get knocked or vibrations make it fall over. I had it in its own little designated corner, propped up with cups in case it started to fall forward, and I was treating this thing like it was the most precious thing on earth until we cut the cake. Then I just left it in the middle of the bench and anything goes, and I was shocked. This thing could withstand an earthquake. It did not move, it did not fall forward, it did not break, it didn't show any signs of distress, and in the end I actually threw this in the bin. So 7 days of work just to throw a cake topper in the bin, but these are the things you do for your children when they ask you for a Michael Jackson birthday cake when they're turning 6. So whilst you watch me here putting together the suit, I'll explain what I've done with the head. Originally, I was going to make the head round, and those wires at the top were purely just for me to hold on to the figure as I was working with it. But what I ultimately ended up doing was squashing that circle into a straight line, twisting it on itself, and then I used a piece of cake dough, which you will see later on in the video, as the neck and most of the head for the support. And when I made the head, I used the same width cake dowel to put the hole through the figurine's head and then slot it on top. That will all become clear when you see it later on in the video, but the point of it was I didn't want the wire by itself without the cake dowel to pierce through the fondant or the gum paste that I actually used, and I also didn't want to have the weight of the head crush the body. So whilst it hugged the cake dowel, it wasn't going to be doing any of that, and it helped to keep its shape round, and it was also a lot stronger than having just the wire, because if it was just the wire, the weight of the gum paste probably would have tilted the head completely forward onto itself so that I suppose the chin was on the chest, and I didn't want the chin on the chest. I wanted the head looking forward straight with its back, like Michael Jackson tilts forward in the film clip. His head and body is all in one line and he just all goes forward. I didn't want there to be any motion of that head dropping. Adding the lapel and features to the suit was the simplest part, and now I'm trying to do the tie. So Windsor knot, or whatever you want to call it, it's just a triangle here, popping it on. But unlike a normal tie, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the film clip and in the photograph that I've got, Michael Jackson's tie at the bottom doesn't go down into a diamond shaped point. It's actually cut off flat. I hadn't seen a tie like that before, but this is how the tie was done. So you see I'm cutting a point for the top, which is where it connects with the knot, but then it's completely flush straight at the bottom, because that is how the tie is in the film clip of Michael Jackson. And here is where I'm adding the cake dowel to the wire, because you can see I've crushed it. And this part will hopefully explain to you what I tried to just explain to you moments ago. Whenever I'm dealing with cakes or have to do faces on cake toppers, that's where I find it lets the cake down, because the detail is in the eyes. Lucky for me, Michael Jackson likes to tilt his hat in front of his face. Now, if you've seen a few of his film clips, you'll notice this, that he has hats on a lot of the time, or he's in character. So Thriller, for instance, he's got the mask on, and that covers his face. And then here in Smooth Criminal, he tilts his hat forward, and also in some of the other clips like Billie Jean and things like that, he's always got a hat on. So I was really pleased at the fact that I didn't have to worry so much about facial features being on point. And here with the hair, that was the other thing I didn't have to really worry about too much, because one, it was going to be a lot hidden under the hat, and two, there was still just enough showing so that it didn't look bald, and you didn't have to worry too much about styling it. Ideally, I was going to do like a little bunch in a hair tie, which is what Michael Jackson has in this film clip, but because I wasn't making this thing to scale or making it exactly precise, it didn't bother me to leave the hair the way it was. The other thing you've probably noticed is that I've put an armband on both arms on the suit jacket. It's only on one arm in the film clip, but I've chosen two because at this stage of the cake top-up process, I didn't know which way I was going to be facing Michael Jackson, and I wanted to be able to visibly see the armbands from both sides. So when you look at it from side on, you only see one anyway, but for the purposes of me not having made up my mind which way this was going and what the actual cake was going to ultimately look like, I just put it on both sides whilst I had all of my kit together and available at my disposal. Finally getting towards the end of this cake topper, and now it's just the small little fiddly bits. So shoes, black with white on them, very simple, pretty much like the rest of the cake design, black and white. And this part of the cake got me a little bit concerned because then I had to start thinking about what I was actually going to do for the cake. I was in two minds. Originally, I wanted just a simple cake, and then the cake topper was going to take over. Once I made my cake topper, and as I said previously, I wasn't exactly happy with the cake topper, I was trying to think of a design for the cake that would match the theme of disco, and Michael Jackson could just stay next to the cake and not be the center of attention. But after speaking with a few people in my circle, they were saying to me, make Michael Jackson the main and just have a simple cake. And I think that was the best idea given the brief that I received from my son is I want a Michael Jackson cake. I think if I made anything different, it probably wouldn't have been exactly what he wanted. Making the hat now, or if I'm pronouncing this correctly, fedora, and I made the brim of the hat way too wide originally, cut it a bit smaller, and then I had made the top of the hat and it looked like a top hat, so I had to cut that down as well. But I didn't bother to show you all of those little annoying bits because this was about 4.5 hours of raw footage before I've cut this down, and I think that that's way too long to sit through me talking about a cake topper. I was getting excited at this point because the end was near. Not because I was happy with the finished product, but because I could put it down, have a think about it, and see whether I actually really liked it or not. My son was asking very specific questions yet again, and this time it was, but where's the cake? Obviously, we're getting to that part. Like I said before, I wanted to do something simple, so I gave him the option whether he wanted a round cake or a rectangle cake. And he chose rectangle, which was fine. It meant I only had to bake one cake. Normally I would put the cakes in the freezer, but because we were hosting his birthday party at home, the freezer was full and so was the fridge. So I made the cake just the day before so that it would be fresh and ready to go in the morning for me to cut it in half, fill it with icing and ice all around it. Oh, and if I didn't mention this before, if my hands look like I've just changed the oil in my car, it's because I decided to colour the gum paste black and I didn't wear gloves because I just don't wear gloves when I'm colouring the fondant or the gum paste in this instance, and that was an issue, but that's why my hands look the way they look, in case you were wondering. But there you have it, he's standing. This is the finished product about 4 days prior to my son's birthday, and at this stage I was thinking, yeah, not too bad, it looks okay, but I had to think about it a lot. Cake time, finally the easier part of this whole process. Mentally not that easy because like I said before, I was trying to think, do I do a simple cake or do I make the cake into something? And right up until the morning, I had plans to turn this cake into a record player rather than just a plain cake because I couldn't decide on what colours to use, and I also couldn't decide whether I really liked this Michael Jackson, and I didn't know whether I wanted to put that as the main feature on a simple cake or to have a cake that looked fantastic and just have him on the side and be like, yep, met the criteria, Michael Jackson cake. Anyway, I stuffed this up when I was putting the top layer back on the cake and put a massive hole in it, but nothing that a lot of buttercream can't cover. And like I said, when I couldn't decide what colours I wanted to make this cake, they were really dull in the end. But my inspiration for it, if you want to call it that, came from watching the film clip a couple of times. And if you watch the film clip or if you've seen it before and you remember it, you'll notice that it's set in a really dark alleyway where they go into a secluded room, and those colours are predominantly the colours of the film clip. There's blues and greys, whites, spotlights. Michael Jackson stands out, but everything else is pretty much dark. So that's the theme here without it being too depressing. And because it's only for a 6-year-old birthday and not for an adult, I tried to be a little bit lighter of the darker colours. Laying the buttercream on thick because I didn't want to have to do crumb coat, put it in the fridge, take it out, do another coat. And also, like I said before, my fridge was full. There was no room for this cake. So whatever I made had to be able to stay outside of the fridge and get itself together. I could have blended all of these colours together just by running a thick or a large spatula over the top. I decided to do it the hard way because that's just, I don't know why, that's just what my brain defaults to, difficult. Anyway, I got a small offset spatula to start to smooth out each colour and then slowly kind of blend them in a little bit. I didn't want them all blended, but I just wanted them a little bit softer rather than stark edges. So that's what I've done here, and then just taking it off the sides as well. For these colours, again, you can see there's a little tinge of green, and this is just me because whenever I make buttercream, I obviously use yellow butter, and then I don't use enough violet to reduce the yellow in the buttercream before I go ahead and add the colours. So that's why there's green tinges to everything. But again, it's a softer colour than being dark grey. I'll take this time to talk about how I adjusted the cake topper to actually fit in the cake, because you'll see later on that it's not having the stand showing. So I got a cake board and I cut out the number 8, if you want to call it that, but made sure that for the top I cut that number 8 into 2 circles, or a circle and a circle with a portion cut out of it, and then cut spots for the shoes. I slid that over the top of the cake topper, and I also cut out another number 8 from the cake board to put underneath. So I sandwiched the stand between these 2 cake boards, using hot melt glue to glue the cake dowels that are on that wire stand in between the 2 cake boards. So at this point you can't see the dowels that I've used or the wire that Michael Jackson is standing on. That's all covered with these cake board stands. Now, rather than put such a big footprint of that number 8 directly onto the cake and leaving it like that, I then got cake dowels, 6 of them that I cut down, and I made like a stand. So the best way that I could describe this is, if you buy a pizza and sometimes they've got that little circular disc right in the middle that's like standing on 3 prongs so the lid doesn't squash down onto the pizza, kind of to mimic that. And then when I went to put it in the cake, those cake dowels were the correct depth of the cake so that they touched the board and the whole weight of the cake topper wasn't pushing down onto the cake. So you'll see it when I go to show you towards the end of this video, but that's how I did it. And then I decorated around this stand, this makeshift spotlight stand that Michael Jackson is now surrounded by, just to hide the big gaps. Otherwise you would see all of that and it wouldn't look that great. Time to add some writing to the cake. So Michael Jackson, everyone would know, used to say hee hee a lot. So this says, Ezra, happy birthday. I kept it simple, kept it to the point, and it didn't need anything else because Michael Jackson is now taking up quite a large portion of that corner of the cake, which I had obviously pre-measured out to make sure I had space for the writing and for the cake figure. So you can see from this that there is a gap between those 2 boards because they are sandwiching the wire that's connected to the Michael Jackson figurine. And then I'm going around with buttercream to just hide all of that. And it kind of looks like he's on a stand or under a spotlight. If I wanted to add something else to this cake, I could have made like a street light to project over the top. I didn't have any time for that, and I didn't really want to get into any more details. Considering my goal at the end of this was to get rid of the cake topper, I wasn't going to add more work to my plate. But there you have it, a Michael Jackson cake topper on top of a simple rectangle cake. Ezra, happy birthday, and he loved it. Thanks for watching.